If you're not so good with conversations or you feel just a bit awkward around strangers, I have just the thing for you. Welcome the Sony NW-WM1Z. If you just plop this device on any coffee table, you'll have people you've never met before come up to you and ask what the heck this thing is, how much you paid for it, and you know what, it might even get really intimate as they start to question your sanity. Well, hello ladies and gentlemen, it's that one noob here today, and as you can tell, I have the Sony NW-WM1Z and the Sony NW-WM1A in for review. Yes, if you didn't already know, these are Sony's flagship DAPs, and boy do they have a price tag that corresponds to this title. This will set you back about a convenient 3.2k USD in the States, and this will set you back about 1.2k USD in the States. In Singapore, it's a little bit cheaper. This comes in at about a 3,999 Sing dollars, and this is about 1,599 Sing dollars. So, even by audiophile standards, we're looking at some very, very expensive devices. And one of the things that really interested me before I embarked on this review was understanding the considerations that would lead someone to potentially consider the WM1Z as a purchase. Now, I spoke to several local enthusiasts, and I do feel that I have a better handle on this issue, and that my perspectives have indeed been broadened. Now, in assessing the WM1Z and the WM1A, I will not only be looking at sonic quality, but will also be considering build quality, general design, and also the feature set that's available on both of these players. Now, without further ado, let's get started. Now, with the NW-WM1Z, you get a fairly uninspired unboxing experience. This is a cardboard box of paper inserts, and frankly, for 3.2K, doesn't really cut it. Now, the accessories aren't particularly good either, in the sense that they're not very functional. Now, let's start with the wrist strap. If you try using the NW-WM1Z with this wrist strap, you're probably going to end up breaking your wrist. It's 0.5 kg, people. There's no way you're going to be able to use this wrist strap in any meaningful form. This wrist strap wouldn't even be that big an issue if the case was better designed. And I'm going to tell you a bit about some of the interesting flaws that I see in this case. The first thing is that it's a bit of a flip case design, so ergonomically it's just making things more difficult. A heavy player and this entire flap hanging out just isn't doing it. Now, that's fine, but the thing that really gets me is that there's a cutout for the useless wrist strap, but no cutout for the charging port. Now, imagine putting this on a small desk. This thing occupies more real estate than a book in comparison. Yeah, I think you can get a better sense of just how inconvenient this entire setup is. Putting that away, I don't like the fact that the case doesn't really do much protecting either. This entire part's revealed. I guess it's a small sacrifice if you want to show off the gold-plated oxygen-free copper, but in my opinion, there should just have been a form-fitting case with a couple of screen protectors. That would have been the far more cost-effective and practical solution. Design-wise, I really like the WM1A and the WM1Z. I find that the design is fairly sound and is very user-friendly. We get this nice chamfered edge with a smooth satin metal finish that just really feels nice in the hand and in fact can be pocketed very easily. This stands in stark contrast with some of the sharper, edgier designs that seem to be popular with DAP manufacturers today, and I just feel that Sony has done a good job in making this user-friendly. On the side here, you do get a ton of physical touch buttons, but there is an order to this chaos. If we see the power button here, it's located right underneath this lip, and that makes it very easy to find. The volume button can easily be found by this raised dot on the plus and another raised dot on the play and pause. So by a system of tactile touch, you can very easily navigate this series of buttons with just a little bit of muscle memory. It also integrates very nicely with the touchscreen functionality. At the bottom here, we see the Microsd slot, which is covered by this little lid. That's very nice because you don't want dust getting into the port. And as you can tell, we have a single Microsd slot. Now, I do find this to be a bit unfortunate because maximum right now, you're looking at 456 gigabytes of storage on the WM1Z and about, if I'm not wrong, 328 gigabytes of storage on the WM1A if you use the internal storage and a 200 gigabyte microSD. Players with 2 microSD card slots will soon be able to store far more music than either one of these players, because if you have about 256 gigabytes of microSD storage and you multiply that by 2, you're going to be looking at a fairly substantial amount, about 512 gigabytes, and that will eventually overtake either one of these players, especially since the microSD cards are getting cheaper by the day. So that's something to consider. The Walkman port is, well, I guess it makes a return. It's a bit annoying, and you do have to remember to bring the cable, especially if you're going to the office. And here we have the little slot for the wristband that I have personally never used through the course of this 3-week review. Here we have a hold button to disable the touchscreen and the physical buttons in case the DAP is in your pocket. Nothing special there. At the top we have the new JTA standard with a 4.4mm balanced connection and the single-ended output. So, very nice. It's interesting to note because both of these players have increased output power, and for once they are actually competitive. I felt the ZX2 simply did not have enough power to run a wide range of audio devices, such as even the ER4 was unable to be supported because there simply wasn't enough power coming out of the ZX2. With this WM1A and the WM1Z, you're looking at about 247 milliwatts into 15 ohms coming out of the balanced output for each channel, and closer to 57 milliwatts into 15 ohms for the single-ended. This is slightly different than the manufacturer published ones. It's just a bit lower because I actually measured it myself. So that's something to note. I'll give you a brief rundown of how the OS works now. So I just wanted to take a moment to go over the OS of this player and to give you a better sense of what you'll be encountering should you purchase either the WM1A or the WM1Z. To start, this is a Sony original OS. I know there was a bit of confusion at the start, and it has since been confirmed that this is not Android based. One of the obvious limitations is that it lacks any form of Wi-Fi, streaming, or DLNA/networking support. Yeah, to me this does limit the flexibility of this player quite a bit, especially on the WM1Z, which is very expensive. I know that there are people who want that kind of support, and this may be a deal breaker in that sense. Now moving on to the OS itself, it is a bit slow, and firmware 1.00 does not have me impressed. The bit Opus number 1 is extremely cheap in comparison to either one of these players, and the OS is much smoother and much more responsive. I think you'll see this as I scroll through. You can tell it's not exactly fast. Now, on the home page, you have your standard navigation methods, and depending on how you like to organize your songs, you can adjust the number of options you see via select items to display. You can also reset this over here, reset display item order. I just use folder most of the time, but you know, it is nice to have these other options available. Now moving into the settings, you have all your standard settings. You can adjust brightness, Bluetooth, and all that. I'll go over the stuff that I feel is important. Over here we have just your standard album display and playback options. Nothing much over there. Output settings, you can adjust the volume limit for Asian Walkmans, because it is my understanding that European devices have this locked. Here we can turn it on and off. Now, the high gain output can be turned on for either the mini jack, the balanced jack, or both. And for left-right balance, you can adjust channel imbalance or whatever, should you feel the need to do so. USB output for DSD, I've set to auto, and here you can adjust your DSD playback settings. I have it on slow roll-off and -3 dB. You can also choose to play DSD in native format, but this is a bit misleading because DSD only comes out from the balanced output and not the single-ended. If you should play DSD through the single-ended, it will take the DSD and convert it to PCM. I really don't understand why this kind of a design decision was implemented. This seems like just a very forceful way to get people to jump aboard the 4.4 millimeter balanced standard, and I'm really not a fan of it. I feel that if you're paying this much money for a player, you should really have full control over it. But you know what? That's just one of those things. Now I'm going to bring this back down. Here you can adjust the direct source of sound. Actually, there's an easier way to do this. I'll show you later. Bluetooth and near field connection and your unit information, which tells you how long this player has been used. And as you can tell, I have used this player for close to 246 hours. So past the recommended 200-hour mark. Now, here, let me bring us back to the play screen. You can adjust the type of playback screen here. Most of the time I just have it set on Spectrum Analyzer. I like to see the Spectrum Analyzer, but you can also have it on the less power consuming album art mode. To access the various DSP functions on here, you can actually just slide up and turn off the direct sound. You have dynamic normalizer, which adjusts the volume differences between tracks. You have the DC phase linearizer, DSC HX, and a 10-point equalizer. Frankly, I don't really like using the DSP. I just prefer to hear it in direct source. Okay, I'm not sure how direct source is, but you know, it's definitely easier to access than it was on the ZX2, which was apparently a pain to disable if you didn't want any of those DSP features. So apart from that, this is a decent OS. I mean, it works and there's no major issues with it. It's just not very fast, and as you can tell, scrolling is slightly, it really is slow. So that's just one of the quirks about it. I hope in future firmware updates they can optimize it and make this a bit faster. Apart from that, it works. Now let's talk a bit about the sound. Now, I'll be the first to tell you that the difference between these two players isn't that big. And frankly, the WM1Z isn't so much a direct upgrade as it is more of a variation of sound. The WM1A, to me, is actually a very nice sounding DAP. I like that it strikes a nice balance of detail retrieval, extension, dynamics, and staging, and it sounds, as mentioned before, very balanced. It's got a very nice punchy bass section and it has a level of decay that feels just right. Mids and highs perform well, though I do feel that there is a slight grain when it comes to certain vocal tracks. The WM1Z, on the other hand, has a much fuller bass section, and it's got a bit of that diffuseness that reminds me a bit of the Z1R signature. In fact, I don't feel that these two pair all that well together. This pairs better with the Z1R than the WM1Z. Now, this is the reason why I don't say that the WM1Z is a direct upgrade. Because of this diffuseness, I feel that the textural quality of the player isn't as good as the WM1A. And, you know, perceived detail retrieval level is similar, but slightly less. So I guess it's going to be a bit of a matter of personal taste, but for me, the WM1A would take the cake. Now, the first serious comparison that I'll bring up is the AK NW-380, which is Estelle and Current's current flagship. And I feel that in terms of design, both of these players want to be in a similar place, and it's the first serious competitor we'll have against the WM1Z. Now, both of these players do tend towards a softer sound, whereas the WM1A doesn't. And I do feel that the WM1Z, while being just a little bit diffuse in comparison to this player, is still better than the AK380, and that's because it sounds more present and features better dynamics. I like that there is a good impact in the lower frequencies and an overall sense of just being more involved. However, the mids are clear on the AK380, and generally speaking, the AK380 does have slightly better air and clarity. Now, against both of these players, as mentioned before, I do really like the WM1A because I feel that it is crisper and more impactful with just generally better articulation. Now, apart from sonics, the AK380 does have a couple of advantages that make it a little bit hard to beat. The AK380 has extensive networking and server support, and its ability to handle Wi-Fi really increases the flexibility and possible upgradability of the device as opposed to something like the WM1Z and the WM1A. The EQ function is also superior on the AK380. Now, the one thing that the WM1A and the WM1Z do well is battery life, and I think they do pull ahead in that sense. So, based on your feature set and sonic preferences, I'll leave it up to you to decide which player you want to get. I think, in fact, these two players in the AK380 do want to be in approximately the same space. But at the end of the day, it's going to be, for the most part, the streaming that makes it or breaks it for the consumer. Now, the other player that I did manage to hear was the Lotu PAW Gold. And, you know, at first, you're going to be looking at the Lotu PAW Gold and you're going to be wondering, how does this have anything to do with either of these two players? Well, you know, apart from the fact that it lacks a touchscreen, both of these players are in fact very focused on just pure sonic reproduction. Now, the thing that I did feel with the LPG was that it just sounded better, generally speaking. You have a much more forward presentation of sound with micro detail retrieval levels that just jumps ahead of either of these two players. I was listening to the Daft Punk track Fragments of Time, and you can just hear the fingers on the fingerboard, and you know, that is the kind of micro detail retrieval level that we're talking about on the LPG, and it's just so much more present than even the WM1Z. And that's where I feel the LPG pulls ahead. Micro detail retrieval is better, and generally speaking, you're looking at better separation, just a cleaner signature. Now, one of the things is that the LPG doesn't have as good a soundstage and imaging as the WM1Z. The WM1Z does, and the WM1A both have this very wide soundstage, and in comparison, you do get the sense that the LPG has a slightly smaller presentation of sound. So if you prefer that slightly more laid-back presentation, I think there is still an argument to be made for both of these Sony players. The great thing about these two players too is that they do have a much longer battery life, though the output power is correspondingly less when compared to the LPG. Now, another player in this price range that I recently had the chance to try out was in fact the Beats Opus No.2, and sonically I feel that it didn't quite match up to either of these two players. The Opus No.2 has a bit of this thinner signature that leads to a sense of greater perceived air and separation. However, it does give up a bit of punch, and at this price range, we shouldn't really be making too many sacrifices for one sonic aspect. In fact, we should be expecting a generally high level of performance in all sonic respects. And I think the Opus No.2 just doesn't quite have the same level of dynamics and bass punch as either of these two players. Now, it does have an edge in terms of networking, as if I'm not wrong, it does support Wi-Fi, and that gives it the potential to become a networking component, but sonically it's not quite at the same level as these two players. So I think that more or less closes up this review. I know it's been one of the longer ones, but this is also one of the more complex products to review, and I really hope that you found this both informative and just a little bit enjoyable. Once again, thanks for watching, guys, and it's That One Noob signing out.